evening, everyone, and welcome to our third Campfire Chat, which is NatureBridge's ongoing series of virtual conversations with inspiring leaders in the outdoor field. My name is Kristina Rylands, and I'm the Regional Director for NatureBridge's Yosemite campus, and I'm delighted to be with you tonight for a discussion about fire with my very dear friend, an incredible trailblazer in her field, Kelly Martin. I'm coming to you from my home in Mariposa, California, where I have my fireside glowing, and I hope this finds you all likewise cozy wherever you are. Just really appreciate everybody joining us tonight. You know, I'll bet every single person on this call remembers that moment when you first fell in love with the national park. And I first fell in love with Yosemite as a 10-year-old coming to the park on a family vacation. And today I've spent 28 years of my career here working not only for the National Park Service, but for the last 10 years as the director of our Yosemite program. Before we dive in, I want to point out a few of the Zoom features that we'll be using tonight. First, I invite you to click on the icon at the bottom of your screen here and for the chat feature, and be sure to set your chat for all panelists and attendees selected. So that way you can all chime in during tonight's discussion at any time. And why don't we get started by letting us know where you all are tuning in from tonight? So Jeanette, San Diego, Victoria, British Columbia, Atlanta, hello Atlanta, Woodside, hello Woodside, San Diego, San Francisco, of course we have people from San Francisco, Shingle Springs, California, Newbury Park, that's where I grew up, right near Thousand Oaks, Seattle, Falls Church, Virginia, Yosemite Valley, of course. Oh, look at Nancy is coming from Chicago, Portland, San Mateo. Oh, I'm so excited to see so many of you joining us from all over the country tonight. It's just phenomenal. Be sure to make sure that you click on your chat in the little window where it says to. Be sure that you have it listed as panelists and attendees. That way everybody gets to see your chat, your comment, your question, and we can all take place and share in the dialogue during our conversation tonight. I'm coming to you tonight, as I mentioned, from the Yosemite Gateway community of Mariposa, just outside of the park, and I'm deeply honored to acknowledge that Yosemite is the homeland to 7 culturally associated American Indian tribes, including the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation, the Bishop Paiute tribe, the Bishop Bridgeport Indian Colony, the Mono Lake Kutsitika, North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians of California, the Picayune Rancheria of the Chukchansi Indians, and the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. So during tonight's conversation, we're also going to be using the Q&A feature down below here. And if you have any questions during the course of the evening that you would like to ask during our conversation, you can submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And if you see a question that you like, give it a thumbs up so we know to answer it. And now, without any further ado, I am so honored to welcome our guest and my very dear friend, Kelly Martin. Kelly, hi.
Hi. Hey, I just love the fire in the background, so I'm really digging that as definitely a fireside chat.
One is a set mood for us, you know.
For sure. Really want to thank you for the invite to this fireside chat tonight and to NatureBridge. NatureBridge is very, very near and dear to my heart because of the education component for the young people, you know, coming up in our education system who are inspired by the outdoors and by natural resources and hopefully becoming a natural resource manager themselves. And so a little bit about myself, I'm actually a Midwest transplant. I was born and raised in the Midwest and went to school at Northland College and graduated in 1984. And that's really where I began my National Park Service career, was at the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, right as I got out of college, and then transferred to Grand Canyon, where that was really the tipping point for me, where I really got involved in trying to understand how fire really benefits the landscape. So it really, for me, working for the National Park Service, starting with the National Park Service, and really getting to know prescribed fire and how fire is used on the landscape, really started at Grand Canyon. And then most recently, 2006, I became the Chief of Fire and Aviation at Yosemite National Park, and was there until last year during my retirement. So my tenure there at Yosemite was by far, the capstone of my career, coming full circle. I had worked for the U.S. Forest Service as well. But engaging with you and Moose Mutlow and others at NatureBridge, and really seeing that vision was very, very exciting for me, and really became a base for a lot of work that I did at Yosemite.
Well, we couldn't be more thrilled to have you join us tonight for this conversation. And I mean, what a more compelling topic can there be than fire? And we're going to be having a really interactive conversation with you. We're going to invite our guests that are all joining us from all over the country to participate in this conversation as well. So one last feature I want to point out before we dive in is our polling feature, which as we move through our time tonight, we'll be using this feature. And before we ignite our discussion, let's get a sense from all of you about your experience with wildfires. So please take a moment to look at this poll and answer the question, what is your experience with wildfires? Personally, I have to say, I've been evacuated or on some sort of pre-evacuation notice over 5 times in as many years. And even just today was probably the first day in a long time that I didn't check the air quality index for smoke impacts due to local wildfires. So for me, it's been, it's pretty much a daily part of my life. So let's see what folks are saying. Wow, 57%. So a lot of folks have had either have been impacted by wildfire directly, or someone who's been directly impacted by wildfire. For those, the 9% who have not experienced any impacts, I'd love to know where you're from. So Kelly, I think this is a great place for us to start off. Nearly everybody joining us tonight has either been directly or impacted by wildfire or knows someone who has. And can you tell us what is going on with that? And has it always been this way? And just as a reminder for folks that are listening, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat as we talk here. So Kelly, tell us.
Yeah, thanks, Kristina. And I also want to acknowledge everybody that's here with us tonight as well, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of this chat. I learn a lot from you. I learn a lot from the conversations that I have with Kristina and Moose and folks at NatureBridge as well. So it's an exciting time for me to always kind of refresh, my passion for wildland fire and what it means to you, because oftentimes I don't see the firsthand impacts that it has to people. But one of my goals is, as an educator as well, if I'm not doing my job well enough to help inform and educate people, the general public, then I'm not doing my job either. So what's going on, and has it always been this way? When I started, Kristina, there was what we called the fire season. And I think everybody now can really kind of relate to, we're witnessing, fire years. So this is a significant shift from seasonal wildfire season in the summertime to now year round. We're seeing, large fires. And I think there's one on the east side of the Sierras even tonight. So it's really taking it's making a significant impact, not only on our wildland fire staff, but our communities that live close to fire environments. So has it always been this way? What I'd like all of us to kind of think about, like put our history hat on of like 100 years ago. California only had about 2 million people. And so now we're almost up to and or above 40 million. So imagine the impact that additional people have on California. The eras of the 30s, from the 1930s to the 60s, this was really in a very aggressive suppression era. It's a 10 a.m. policy. We're putting out all fires. And I'm also going to kind of talk about Smokey Bear and the ad campaign. And it was a very, very successful history. And I'm just going to ask this you can put this in the chat. Do you remember the slogan from Smokey Bear? But after Smokey Bear in the 60s and 70s, it was really the environmental movement. And that was really I think, a really significant point for a lot of land managers, not just the National Park Service, but the Forest Service and the BLM, Fish and Wildlife, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There was a growing chorus of researchers and scientists that were saying that, there is an essential and elemental need for fire for healthy landscapes. But it was a very, very hard narrative to kind of push against. The 80s, a lot of wilderness areas developed plans to use natural ignitions, and that's where Yosemite started their wildland fire management program with Jan van Wagendonk and Harold Biswell. So it was really, I see them as the fathers of the fire management program of Yosemite. So hurrah for those two. It's been 50 years since they had the foresight to really develop a really solid scientific based fire management program in Yosemite. So real proud of their work, but it brings us up to 2020 and what we saw this year. And it's wide scale drought, insect and disease affecting forested landscapes, really causing significant mortality of vegetation. So there's all these little, components to what we're seeing in 2020. But then the other thing, and this is a question for our group again, is take ourselves from today and think long-term and think big for the next 50 years. And a question to all of you is, do we have the willingness to coexist with fire? And if so, what does this look like to you? Or what questions might you have about how we're going to coexist with fire?
Well, I'll say your first question, we had a lot of people chime in. Remember that only you can prevent forest fires was the Smokey Bear slogan. I grew up with that. A lot of us did. And so Kelly, I'm wondering about what's really changed. And you mentioned the, obviously state of California, dramatic population increase. How has that increase in population changed the landscape and our relationship with fire over time?
I think everybody knows that we definitely have a very broad network with social media, not just social media, but television and newspapers. And the way I kind of like to look at, how this increase in population has changed on the landscape and fire over time is that I hope we can see this as more of a people problem and not so much as a fire problem, because it's the people and it's the developments and where we choose to increase our housing units. And it's a really big issue. I mean, we're going to continue to need, additional housing, but you think about a fire environment where California really has been born and bred of fire. And now we're just seeing these huge, massive fires. And it is a combination of, where people are moving, and the more people that we have that are moving into these fire environments, the more that they're going to be impacted by fire. So this is really significant. This has been a significant change and shift over time is the population. And just recently, I really think all of you are probably witnessing more people moving into rural areas because of COVID. And think about how that is going to affect the demand for housing over time. And so at a local unit with local elected officials in planning and zoning, I really think that we're going to see the pressure to develop more housing in fire-prone areas. And that should be a huge caution to all of us.
Well, I can speak from my own experience growing up in Southern California. It wasn't unusual to see a brush fire pop up in the hills surrounding our town. And, as a kid, that was kind of scary. And it really wasn't until I went on a Yosemite Institute program, now known as NatureBridge, when I was in high school in the early 80s. That was the first time I learned that fire was not all bad and could actually be good for an ecosystem. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that. What is a quote unquote bad fire and a good fire look like?
Yeah, I'd first have to kind of reframe that a little bit. Yeah, we have undesirable fire outcomes and desirable fire outcomes. And so when we think about good fire, bad fire, we tend to, box this incredible element into a binary, good or bad. And what I really hope that people can come away with is that fire is just fire. It's been here way longer than we have, on the landscape, and really doing incredible work and really essential work in terms of nutrient recycling and reducing the stem density, of trees. And it really is a regenerative process. If you really think about fire as a regenerative process. So the concept of, good fire, bad fire, if you will, a lot of people view prescribed burning as being good fire. But to be honest with you, the public and the people that live near some of these large prescribed burns, they're even more intolerant of smoke. And what we really want people to understand is, look, we really want to do more large landscape burning in the fall and maybe in the wintertime where the slopes are clear of snow, so that we can actually on our terms go in and start reducing some of the forest fuels on the ground under our conditions. And so the other thing to really think about when you think about, fire as a process is that oftentimes we see acres destroyed, and that's a misnomer, because really again, it's a regenerative process, but really the piece that we're most concerned about is losing the large trees, on the landscape to these really high intensity fires, and that's really a bad outcome. So our as land managers, as natural resource managers and fire managers, really trying to balance the use of fire, the good, and recognize that quote unquote the bad outcomes are when houses burn or people are hurt or killed because of these large fires, which is absolutely, devastating to communities and to families.
Now you mentioned prescribed fire. Can you just explain quickly what prescribed fire is for the folks that may not know what that is and how that's differentiated from other kinds of fires? Because I know that our campfire chat tonight is called Fighting Fire with Fire, and I'm curious to know what do we mean by that, and how do we fight fire with fire?
Sure. Think of, the broad term that we use is wildland fire. So it really does encompass both wildfires and prescribed fires. So wildland fire, in terms of the umbrella, underneath that umbrella is prescribed burning or controlled burns. And that's really where we as managers, we plan, we do a lot of the research. We work with fire ecologists, we work with planners, we work with communication and outreach specialists. And it does take a tremendous amount of time before we even light the match to use a drip torch and really use fire on that landscape to meet resource objectives, both natural resources and cultural resource objectives, by reducing that fuel loading. Whereas wildfire, on the other hand, it could be a human start or it could be a lightning start. And most of you that are familiar with wildfires in Yosemite know that almost every year we'll have several fires burning from lightning caused fires. So those wildfires within our fire management plan also helps us achieve our land management objectives. But I don't want people to think for one moment that a wildfire that's being managed on the landscape is a hands-off. It really isn't. There's a lot of art and science that goes on behind the scenes to really manage these fires on the landscape for the protection of life and property, but also for the enhancement of our landscapes.
Yeah, and Kelly, just from my window right here, uh, here at home, I look out over just this beautiful landscape of mixed oak woodland, and to be honest, sometimes it feels like I'm just looking at fuel for the next fire. And even though we do fire clearance around our home, it can be kind of scary. And I'm sure many people joining us tonight who have experienced wildfire in their communities or experienced the impacts of wildfire smoke might be a little bit wary of the idea of more fire or purposely causing fires. And how do we effectively fight fire with fire?
Oh, that's really a large question, but it's very, very essential. And if we cannot exterminate fire from our landscape, we've tried that for the last 100 years of trying to exterminate, and we've done a very good job with fire suppression in the fire industry with air tankers and helicopters to try to contain fire at a very small footprint. But imagine for a moment that every time we do that, we're preventing, or we're building up more smoke, or we're building up more large fires. And that's a really hard concept for folks to believe and really put their trust in, is that how do we effectively fight fire, with fire? And so, and what are the impacts to you in your community by, smoke? Are you fearful of a prescribed burn? All these are really difficult questions for communities. But really, I think the only way that we're going to really have the energy and support is really doing more outreach and more talks, like this. But fire and smoke go hand in hand. So you really can't have, one, without the other. And if you think about, fire as this peak, in the spring, it gets warmer and drier. And then the peak of the fire season, we have very large fires. But now that we start coming down on the backside and we're going into winter, there's always a place to apply fire on the landscape. So every day is a burn day somewhere in California. And we really have to use the technology, be it artificial intelligence or machine learning or identifying where the old fire footprints are, to really look and see where these next big large fires are going to occur. Once we can see where those are going to occur, then we can go in there and also start doing mechanical fuel removal and doing some prescribed burning to start lessening that intensity. And so it's not a one and done. We don't just go in and do, mechanical thinning and pile burning, but our landscapes are growing very, very rapidly. So think about that too, is that this is not, there's no end in sight. This is in perpetuity in terms of how we manage and how we view fire in California.
Well, Kelly, you mentioned mechanical thinning, and that is a potential technique that's used. And one of the things I wanted to really give you a shout out for is you've been incredibly instrumental and really visionary in helping NatureBridge as we've been moving forward with our new campus at the National Environmental Science Center. And I think really just thanks to your incredible vision about how to best engage young people in this work, we've really looked at transforming our entire curriculum and making our curriculum at the new National Environmental Science Center focused on fire science. So every kid that comes through our program will be not only engaging in learning about fire ecology, but being able to actually work side by side with National Park Service wildland fire crews. And just, I really, first of all, want to acknowledge your work in helping us get to that place and making that a reality. And I'm curious also to know what a question that's probably on everyone's mind is, you know, is it going to get worse before it gets better? Trying to figure out a way to say that in a positive way, but what is your view look like into the future?
I had an epiphany when I first got to Yosemite, and I want to connect this up to NatureBridge because I have this vision back in 2006 when I first got to Yosemite, and we had the frog fire burning deep in the wilderness, and it had been burning for several weeks, and it was well into 4 to 5 weeks by the time I got to Yosemite. And the communities, the gateway communities, were getting really restless. They weren't getting a lot of information. They didn't really know about the positive benefits of fire. They really wanted the Park Service to put out these natural ignitions in the park. And so we had a community meeting. I think it was in Sonora, and we had a room full of people. And I was super scared. I was really nervous because I knew that people were going to be very angry and very upset about the smoke that was impacting them. But I must say, most of the people were cordial. They understood. And I love this thinking that people fear what they don't know. So it is up to me to help, provide the education and the information. Then they can make up their mind from there. But there was several people in that room that were very, very angry with the Park Service and very angry about fire on the landscape. And at that moment, the epiphany was, I have this dream that at some point, fire ecology and fire would become a core part of our educational curriculum of kids, because I think it really is up to this next generation of kids coming through NatureBridge to really learn about fire ecology, read about fires, use their math skills to help us with inventory and monitoring. I just think that you couldn't have asked for a better place, in California to really take part in the educational aspect of putting fire back into the curriculum in California. So shout out, kudos to all of you at NatureBridge. It's just a phenomenal education institution. So I'm very excited for you. So is it going to get worse before it gets better? I had to really think about this, and I think if the past is any indication of the future, I would say yes. It's going to get worse, and it's going to get a lot worse, maybe by the tens of thousands of acres that have not burned in the last 100 years. So I think it feels like we almost have to get through this equilibrium, that there's been so much buildup, and lack of fire in these fire-dependent ecosystems, that we are really in this place where there is going to be a lot of fire. So what does that say to us as our communities and our schools and people that are affected by large fires? We're gonna have to do the best we can to really think about how we can change our mindset to one of how we can live with fire. So yeah, it's a really tough. Because again, the more good fire, if you will, from prescribed burning that we put on the landscape, it doesn't dissipate as well in the wintertime, because we just don't have really good dispersion. Whereas, believe it or not, in the summertime, we do have better dispersion. So I would say, yes, let's be prepared and acknowledge the fact that there's a backlog of our landscapes that haven't burned, that really do need some kind of treatment.
Wow, well, thanks for that view into the future, Kelly, and thanks for all of your role in working with NatureBridge as we think about how to inspire kids. And as I said when we first started, fire is a pretty compelling topic, and thank you for helping us inspire those future generations of folks, and who knows, some of them might be the next Kelly Martin out there. Wouldn't that be great?
I would hope so. Yeah, if I can do it, they can do it. There's other really great people out there. I hope I inspire people to pursue a career in public land management and better yet, fire management.
Great. Well, why don't we open things up for audience Q&A? And I just want to remind folks, if you go into the Q&A box, there's a little thumbs up. You can upvote questions. And if you scroll through some of those questions and there are some that you especially want me and Kelly to address, go ahead and scroll through those and give some thumbs up. Otherwise, feel free to go to the box down below, the Q&A, and you can put in a question and we'll open this up to audience questions. So let's see. I am facilitating this right now, so I'm going through questions. So Andrew Thompson asks, knowing that fires are increasing in intensity and in more urban areas, will policy change to limit the number of homes in such areas? Is it a foregone conclusion that we will continue to build in areas that are prone to fire disaster?
You know, when I think about that at a federal level, you know, really drilling down to a local level, you know, local elected officials, county board of commissioners, board of supervisors, planning and zoning, I think it is really important for citizens to get involved in some of their local land management decisions, because there are developments that have done a very, very good job. It's something that I don't get involved in, and I really haven't gotten involved with planning and zoning and working with insurance companies. I think that's another key to this as well. But granted, you're right. There are areas that we are gonna continue to see growth of additional housing units in these natural environments. There are significant things, engineering-wise, that we can do to help these communities become safer. The thing that's really surprised me over the years, especially these last 5 years or so, is just how deep into the wildland urban interface, from street to street to street, how many homes have been affected and have burned. I just, when we think of wildland urban interface, we think of those developed areas of those homes right against the wildland. But what we're really seeing now is just tremendous amount of fire that's occurring in these streets, in these areas. So I think we owe it to ourselves to get engaged locally. It may not necessarily be something that the feds are involved in, but definitely at a local level and a state level, like even with CAL FIRE.
Mm-hmm. Here's another great question. So, we're really lucky in Yosemite that we have such a robust fire management program. And I think one of the incredible things is our NatureBridge students in Yosemite are able to see what prescribed fire looks like in action. And David Godwin asked a question, can you share some California prescribed fire success stories?
Thanks, David. That's brilliant. We are not doing a good enough job of really showing the public the good things that come out of fire. We would host, Yosemite would host probably not near enough of the media, both television and newspaper reporters, to come in and get pictures of firefighters working on the ground, applying fire on the ground. So I really think that that's a missing piece. We tend to focus in on, we have a very short attention span, but California has, there's tremendous success stories with prescribed burn associations, with indigenous cultures that are using fire, as a cultural practice, putting that back on the landscape. I really like the idea of story maps, but again, it's a matter of getting that out and getting it to the people in your community. And I have seen where people are like, oh, I hope they don't lose that prescribed burn. And I think we owe it to all of us as a community to kind of stop that narrative. And most of our prescribed burns are very, very successful, but it's that one that gets away that tends to get highlighted in the newspaper, and we get persecuted, as fire managers and superintendents. So it's really important that we enter into a shared risk, if you will, that when we do a prescribed burn and we have a successful burn, call your elected officials, call the air quality pollution control districts, and and go on record by supporting the good fire efforts that are going on the land. But in terms of promoting these success stories, I think it's really up to all of us to, get with our the media and newspapers to really promote this really beneficial aspect of prescribed burning.
Great. Carol Yandel is she's a national board member, and with our Golden Gate board, she's asking about the Yellowstone Fire of '88. And if that changed the way firefighting was really thought of, because as I recall, that was one of those catastrophic fires that was kind of let it burn. Did that change the way we think about, or the way at least maybe it's portrayed in the media, the way we're thinking about the way fire is thought of, or firefighting is thought of?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for that question, Carol. In '88 is when I was talking about the history of, how we put fire back on the land. The Wilderness Act and Yosemite, I think it was 1984, about 86% of the park is now wilderness. And so having said that, a lot of larger parks and Forest Service wilderness areas began producing these fire management plans to allow natural fires, on the landscape. '88 was a really dry year, and in lodgepole pine, which Yellowstone was a mature lodgepole stand, it was ripe for stand replacing fire. But keep in mind that lodgepole also needs fire serotinous cones to regenerate. It did call into question the policy, and I really, we can't seem to shake the let burn, but that's what it was called back then. And that's what the media picked up on. And back then it was considered a prescribed natural fire. And if most of you have been in the fire business long enough, you want to pull your hair out by all the different terms that the feds use for fire. But the intent there was to allow fire to play its natural role in our national parks. And as it was, the outcome of that review did state that policy is sound, but we still had further work to do in terms of increasing the science and knowledge about fire behavior and where we allow and how much we allow on the landscape, because it was a very, very big footprint back in '88. But sound policy, and it still helps us to this day that we are using natural fire on the landscape. But '88 was a turning point for all of us.
Our board chair, Ian Yallis, is asking if you can comment on the ways that climate change is fueling the frequency, intensity, and size of wildfires.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. And I get this a lot because it tends to be the piece that gets thrown up in the air that everybody wants to latch on to. It's only considered the big pie. It's only a piece of the pie. Definitely climate change, in how you measure that is earlier fire seasons, drier landscapes, more drought, higher temperatures in the summertime. So you can see the effects of hotter climates for sure, and how that's affecting the landscapes. So climate change, now you've got that operating in the background of 100 years of fire suppression. So you have tremendous fuel buildup on the landscape. And now we've had several years where a drought has really kicked into these areas that have too many trees on the landscape, because we have suppressed fires. Now, fire is a natural thinning element. Light burning would reduce the stand density or the tree density on these landscapes. So now imagine you've got, which normally would have had maybe 5 to 10 trees on an acre, you've got thousands. So there's only so much water and nutrient on these landscapes that can support the vegetation. But I think that this is something, in terms of climate change, we should all agree that this is something that's going to continue to persist into the future. And if it does, good question for all of you, what should we do to be proactive to start addressing the negative consequences of climate change on our ecosystems and biodiversity? what are your ideas, and what are the moonshots? What are the bold ideas that we should be thinking about and we should be supporting as citizens of these Western landscapes?
We have a question from an anonymous attendee asking about, and I know this is something that we talk about with our students in NatureBridge programs, that we started off with a land acknowledgement of the just generations, the 10,000 years of American Indian peoples who have been in the Yosemite region. And I'm wondering if you can speak to their historic use of fire, and how that plays into fire management today.
Just a small little window into, Native culture use of fires in Yosemite Valley, used for game, used for regenerating grasses and forbs that were essential for basket weaving and hunting. And so if you think about Yosemite Valley, that indigenous cultures used the valley and burned the valley in a frequent return interval, we wouldn't have that many trees that we have in Yosemite Valley right now. So we'd have very large trees and very little trees. But the problem we have now is that even with prescribed burning and really trying to use the application of prescribed fire as a surrogate for indigenous cultural burning, we can't even remove the larger trees. So now we have too many trees. So it's really kind of a ethical and moral thing to think about as well, is do we remove some of those trees from Yosemite Valley because 100 years ago, we knew that it was frequently burned by indigenous culture, American Indian cultures that applied fire on the landscape. So I really support the traditional ecological knowledge of the use of fire, and I do see that as gaining traction and interest with lots of different stakeholders going that this is something that we may have missed in our future or our past understanding of fire management. So huge supporter of indigenous cultural burning for sure.
Now, Kelly, when we do these fireside chats, we love to pull together inspirational leaders like you. So I want to ask a little bit of a different question, less related to fire and more about the field of firefighting and fire management, which tends to be a male-dominated field. And Jen Lawton, who's in our development team, is asking, she'd love to hear more about what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated field like fighting fire, managing fire.
Yeah, I kind of grew up as a tomboy, and my dad was always super supportive of kind of the rough and tumble edge for the three daughters he was raising. And so I didn't really so even at an early age, developing those family values and beliefs as a very young girl growing up, that my dad really supported me in saying, look, kid, you can do anything you want to do. But he did, the caveat there was like, you're going to have to work harder than a lot of your boy counterparts. And I didn't really understand what that meant until I really started getting involved in firefighting. I was often the only woman on the crew fighting fire with a bunch of guys. But the thing that I really loved about that is that really what I was so inspired by, that I really wanted, I saw them, traveling all over the West and camping out, in really remote locations and having to work really, really hard. And that was really the thing that I really wanted to do, is I wanted to know that I could live and work really hard in the outdoors. So if there's young girls and women that really want to do this work, it is different. It is very, very difficult. So you almost have to kind of find your own path of grit and perseverance. If this is something that you really want to do, just know that there's less than 10% women in this field. And then it gets even less than that, maybe 3% of senior leadership positions like I had, at Yosemite. But I'm always very, very willing to work with both young girls and, boys as to how we really treat each other and all of us with respect and dignity, and that we're inclusive of everyone. So I'm excited about the next generation coming up, that hopefully they won't have those kind of implicit biases about what a girl can do or what a boy can do, or girls don't do, firefighting. And it is possible, and it's I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's not easy, but a very, very, very rewarding career after 35 years.
Well, Kelly, we're going to have to wrap up our Q&A here and our discussion. And I'm wondering how people can learn more, and if you have any suggestions on how folks can carry on this conversation beyond tonight.
Yeah, you bet. So I think of things short-term local, mid-term regional, and long-term national. So short-term local is, wherever you live, there's opportunities to get involved, or at least try to seek out what's going on in your local communities. There's lots of really good websites about fire safe communities, the cohesive strategy, and again, local fire departments that are really working with communities to reduce fuel buildup. Anything that you can do to say, we need more cheerleaders out there to say, fire is a good thing. We know that there's definitely fires, and there will always be a need for fire suppression. But let's remember that fire is two sides of one coin. We see fire, on the TV that's destructive, and that those are bad outcomes. But the other side is so incredibly necessary and essential for healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. And you can help your neighbors understand that, and just have those kind of conversations. And as a matter of fact, go up into a burn area and take pictures of wildflowers, after a burn. I've just been so enamored by the flush of greenery after, a wildfire. It doesn't happen everywhere, but sometimes you have to look for it. So get involved locally. Midterm regional, there's state agencies such as, CAL FIRE, and local folks that are doing some really, really good work in supporting their efforts and supporting local federal land management agencies. And then long-term national, if you start paying attention, I think 2020 has got the interest of the 117th Congress. So I'd really encourage you to do some research on the bills that are going to be before the House and the Senate that are supporting wildland fire and wildland firefighters in our communities that are going to be different. And don't be afraid to write your congressman or your senator in supporting these bills, or supporting the efforts, around the use of good fire on the landscape. It took us 100 years to get here. I hope it's not going to take 100 years for us to get out of this really difficult spot. And I do believe that with a lot of people that are saying, you know what, I'm actually going to get my weight behind, what's going on here, because I am now more informed and more educated, and know that, wildland fire is both an art and a science, and it will evolve just like we will evolve with it.
Well, Kelly, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight for this conversation, and thank all of our participants. I've just really enjoyed seeing the comments, folks engaging, answering each other's questions. It's been really, really wonderful. And if you would like to learn more about NatureBridge and the work that we're doing with fire science with our students, you can go to naturebridge.org. Also, I want to remind everybody that our next fireside chat will be taking place on January the 14th. So mark your calendar. And we will be having a conversation between Dr. Stephen Lockhart and former Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell. So that's January 14th. And you can register today at naturebridge.org/campfire. So thank you all so much for joining us on a Thursday evening, wherever you are. Thank you for all of your support for NatureBridge and the work that we do to inspire young people to fall in love with the natural world and really become future stewards of not only our national parks, but our planet. And I wish you all just a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.
Yeah, deep gratitude to you. Thank you.
Great.